Welcome, everyone, to Slave Food Conversations, where two African American physicians explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food in the creation of health disparities in African American communities, irrespective of income. They discover eating a whole food, plant based diet in urban communities is possible and is the key to eliminating health disparities. Dr. Columbus Batiste is an interventional cardiologist in Southern California. Dr. Batiste is a passionate, double board certified interventional cardiologist who has incorporated the power of a whole food plant based diet combined with exercise and stress reduction in his management of patients. Dr. Eric Walsh serves as medical director for urgent care services. Dr. Walsh has a double doctorate in medicine and public health. Dr. Walsh is passionate about educating people on ways to improve their mental, physical, and spiritual health. As a result, he has taken his God-given talents across the world and has given lectures and sermons on every continent. October 1 through 30 is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. This time is set aside to bring forth awareness on a terrible disease that takes the lives of millions. The question remains, is there something that can be done to prevent this disease from taking the lives of our loved ones? For nearly 4 decades, the country has recognized October as Breast Cancer and National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It is a time annually devoted to educating everyone about breast cancer, including the different forms, and the importance of early detection and access to timely, high-quality care. No matter who you are or where you live, breast cancer may have touched your life. It's necessary to understand the warning signs of breast cancer, your risk of breast cancer, and what's normal for you so you can take action if there are any changes in your breast or underarm area. Today's discussion will provide practical ways that you can increase your chances of surviving breast cancer as well as its prevention. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Danette. All right, Eric, good to see you. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Man, I'm well. I'm well. This is crazy times. I'll tell you, is an important topic for us, and important topic for me. I'll tell you, my cousin, and this is the ribbon that was made on her behalf, Rachel Day. So it's important that we honor our loved ones by calling their names. Just passed away this past September after a battle with metastatic breast cancer. Young, and I'll tell you, my cousins and their family, they've lost 3 of the 4 girls. 3 of the women inside that family have been lost to some form of cancer or some events. And so this is why we do what we do. Bring awareness out there.
And I'm very sorry to hear that. This is near and dear to me. Obviously, I've had, in the years of going to church and stuff, seen a lot of women battle with breast cancer, some successfully, some unsuccessfully. Probably the first patient that really struck me in residency at Loma Linda University. I was on the oncology floor, which at that time was in the old hospital at Loma Linda on the 9th floor. And I met this spry, amazing, sophisticated African-American woman in like her early 40s. Her breast cancer had gone into remission. And in the month I was with her, she got better. And then I left the service and found out she had passed away. And I have to say, it was one of those patients that I'll never forget. I used to sit in her room and just talk with her. She was a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and her family loved her. Her kids would come and see her, and it broke my heart. And that's when that was one of those things as a young physician that made you realize the importance of prevention, the importance, like you said, of mentioning people's names and awareness. And so every October, I know the NFL used to do the whole thing and dress in pink. I don't see that this season. I see them write "Intercept Cancer" on some shirts and stuff, but it's our job to keep pushing this. And
absolutely,
as men, some people may ask, why are we as men, talking about breast cancer? But I think it's because we're all interconnected, and because we've got to stand up and fight, and we're going to show in this talk why this is so relevant to us as African Americans and to African American women.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is the fact we all have mothers, right? If
Absolutely.
you're alive, you have a mother. And there's a
Yes.
reason for you to fight against disease that impacts. And we also know that breast cancer can affect men, even though it's a very small
Right.
amount. From a celebrity standpoint, I believe I understand that Matthew Knowles, Beyonce's father, suffered with breast cancer. And I know someone personally who suffered with breast cancer who's a man. So this is something that affects all of us, irrespective. So let's dive into this. I know I mentioned to as well my aunt who, on my wife's side, who survived breast cancer, my sister-in-love, who survived breast cancer. So this is pervasive. It's pervasive. And we know that this is only increasing, right? We're seeing that it is the majority of cancers diagnosed in women. We see these numbers are increasing. I know you know this as a public health guy, right? Having doctor in public health, it's pervasive. It's not the number one killer of women, but it is the number one cancer in women, for sure.
And I think as we go into this, and as we bring up this wonderful young lady here, I think we have to remember that a diagnosis of cancer is probably one of the most fear-inspiring diagnosis we as physicians can give a patient. So it's not
Yes.
just a diagnosis; it's the halo effect, the negative halo effect of all that comes with such a diagnosis. And this is a great case here, example of just the most wonderful young lady. But I'll let you kind of introduce this one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things the studies are really showing is that the number of women under the age of 40 who are receiving the diagnoses of not just breast cancer, but metastatic breast cancer, which means that now this abnormal cell population that's in an organ has now begun to travel to other organs and now has begun to infiltrate. We call that metastases. And we're seeing that this is increasing in terms of number, and that the progression of metastases in breast cancer, it's most profound in young people, adolescents and young women. You're like, well, I don't know anyone like that. More than older women who have a diagnosis of early stage breast cancer. And that's where we introduced head coach Tiffany Jackson, who was a former WNBA star, who died suddenly or died after a battle at the age of 37. The age of 37. 37. This is important. This is important. This is one that we talk about often, is that in women under the age of 45, breast cancer is more common in Black women. So once again, that younger age, we're seeing an early occurrence that happens in people of color, persons of color. But overall, the Black women are more likely to die of breast cancer, even though the rate or the incidence, the likelihood of developing breast cancer in totality is still higher in those of Caucasian descent. But the rate of death is higher in women of color. I'm going to introduce this and let Dr. Walsh kind of kick into some of the screening stuff that early detection. But my wife oftentimes says, a business term that she's quoted oftentimes, you have to inspect what you expect. And I love this quote because what it says to me is that whether or not it's finances, whether or not it's my health, I have to inspect what I'm expecting. If I'm expecting to live healthfully, I need to kind of gauge, well, how am I doing? What's my blood pressure? What's my screening? What's my risk factors? And so having that understanding for early detection is important. But Eric, you want to dive into this?
Yeah, so this one is a tough one. It's like we're starting to see, I think, with other cancers. I would tag colon cancer. These are the ages that we recommend, but we are starting to see this disease, as just mentioned, even earlier than the recommended screening time. So as I give these parameters, I would still encourage women to do what they can if they think something wrong, to even go earlier than this in getting a mammogram. But the recommendation is women age 40 to 44 should have the choice to start annual breast cancer screening with mammograms if that's what they want to do. From 45, to 54, that should be an annual mammogram, ideally. Over 55 with a history of negative screenings, it should go to you can go to every 2 years, or you can keep doing it annually. But again, I want to just really, reiterate the importance that even if you're 35 and you just feel something's wrong, that you should still go in and get checked, and you may need to get a mammogram. I've had a patient in their 20s diagnosed with breast cancer in my career. So, we understand the guidelines, but we do want everybody to know you to definitely get checked if you think something's wrong at any age.
Absolutely. And this is not a fear statement, but there are studies that basically have shown that women who've undergone resection of their breast tissue or reduction of their breast tissue, and pathology studies have shown undiagnosed precancerous cells, changes that are precursors for cancer. And we see it at levels. One author, William Lee, who wrote a great book, Eat to Beat Cancer, right, he wrote that 40% of women by the age of 40 have precancerous cells in their body. So we understand that mammography and self-examination is not a preventative, it's an early detection strategy. Right. So we're trying to detect it as early as possible, but we know that the cell changes begin even before you can detect it or before our screening will detect it, which is why we want to focus on the benefit, what we can do about it kind of going forward as we discuss this further. So, we already touched on what are we as two African-American physicians talking about breast cancer in this world, right? And part of the thing, like we said,
African-American men.
Thank you.
Male
Thank you. Yes, male, what did I say? I said female physicians, what did I say?
You said two African-American physicians. I was like, it's because we're men that we bring this up. But
this is true. Thank you. You're absolutely right, but I have a vested interest. I'm a dad. I am a husband. I am a son. And so it's important. This is important.
That's right.
So we throw this equation out here all the time. And this is the corollary equation to stress equals demands minus resources. Our health equals resiliency divided by our stress. And one of the things that we know clearly is that the higher your stress, the higher your risk for disease, but more specifically, breast cancer is what we've seen.
And we always, as on the Slave Food Project, we always tie this in because we think, matter of fact, I know as a physician that a lot of times this is like a dismissed lifestyle aspect when you go in to see your physician. Very few are going to be asking you, what is your stress levels like? And so we remind you, and we're going to show you some more data on this, just so that everyone who listens gets the importance of why stress must be managed. And we're going to get really into good ways to kind of manage it as well. So.
Yeah. And that's crazy. It's crazy because when you look at it, there are rough estimates that nearly 80% of every physician's visit is tied and linked to stress.
Absolutely.
Anxiety
is the number one
reason for patients.
Yep.
I mean, especially coming out of COVID, so out of the pandemic. So it's amazing that we are not primed to really discuss stress with our patients when we see them inside the hospital here.
Absolutely. So there was a study that analyzed 129,621 women diagnosed with negative emotions, and NES, of which 2,080 women were diagnosed with breast cancer, and their follow-up year ranges were from about 4 years to 24 years. Negative emotions were significantly associated with a 59% higher incidence of breast cancer. 59% higher. And so this speaks to the importance of your home environment, your work environment, even your worship environment, making sure that you are in an environment that does not generate negative emotions. And if you're in an environment or in a situation or in a place where negative emotions are being generated, therapy, CBT therapy is, those things are going to be really important, just to throw that out there.
Absolutely. It reminded me, and I hadn't thought about this before, when I was in medical school, and there's so much internal negativity of I'm not going to be successful or this is too much work. And I remember one of the professors, and all of us remember to this day, the people I talked to from my medical school, they said, say negative, negative. When someone says something to you that's going to impact you negatively, be like negative, negative. I'm canceling out what you're saying. This double negative, I'm going to be positive about that. Yes, I will succeed. So these negative emotions are so important.
Absolutely. So a systemic review and meta-analysis of cohort studies reported that a history of stressful life events might slightly increase breast cancer risk by 11%. And in many of our other talks, we talk about how chronic stress impacts the mind. It raises cortisol levels and what that does in raising adrenaline, noradrenaline. We talked previously in many of our talks of what happens when cortisol releasing hormone crosses the placenta and its effect on the developing fetus. And all of that plays in later life risks. So this stress model that we talk about really starts in the womb and comes all the way through life. In this particular incident, even early life stressful events can later on lead to increased risk of breast cancer. We kind of a diagram showing you how some of that works there, but more important is just to remember that it actually does have a physiologic, or I should say pathophysiologic pathway that causes the stress that cause these diseases.
Absolutely. And those adverse childhood experiences are important to understand. And I think you don't want you to feel overwhelmed and that this is too much, because it's about the solution, that there are things you can do to mitigate this, to stop it. That's important.
So chronic stress significantly affects the occurrence of breast cancer, including promoting tumor cell proliferation and invasion, tumor angiogenesis, and evasive immune system monitoring. And we show a little bit more of kind of how this happens in the diagram here. But just so that you know, this isn't stress and it's just some pie in the sky thing. There's a tangible physiologic pathway, pathophysiologic pathway that happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's another form of stress that we always talk about too as well. That's a unique form of a stressor that impacts individuals. So, well, Eric, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, so if you follow us, you know that we talk a lot about the impact that racism, real or perceived, but racism, especially as it's experienced, impacts health. So in Black Women's Health Study, investigators found a significant relationship between major experiences of racism and breast cancer incidence for younger women. Those are less than 50 years old, which we'll come back to that in a second. In their sample of 593 breast cancer cases, the incident rate ratio was 32% higher for discrimination on the job, and the incident rate ratio was 48% higher for discrimination in all three areas: job, housing, and police. And so one of the reasons this is relevant to me is when you look at the age, less than 50 years old, something about the idea of racism. And part of the reason this is such a very challenging stressor to overcome is because you can't escape being Black. You can't run away from it. It takes a lot to deal with it if you are in an environment, in a situation where you feel you are experiencing racism. And like I always say it, real or perceived. And when I was younger, I had some very, very difficult experiences of racism that colored me for many years to make me automatically assume I was experiencing it again. And with each of those, even if it wasn't an incidence of racism, the perception of it would still raise my cortisol levels and still could drive me to be sick. And so we throw this out there because this just speaks to the fact of the need of our society to really address some of these issues.
Absolutely. It kind of brings us to, not dwelling, but really the solution. And one of the things that I oftentimes have taken our conversations that you and I have had and really kind of encapsulated it into this terminology called selfish, getting selfish. How do we overcome this? We have to get selfish, and not in a negative way, right? We always think of selfish in terms of, oh, don't be selfish with your brother, your sister, and we have a negative connotation, as well as should, for those types of behaviors. But I speak of being selfish in terms of trying to fulfill yourself, fulfill your purpose, and to tap into an aspect that can help you overcome disease as best as we can. And that entails, the S stands for getting spiritual. The E stands for exercise. The L for love. The F for food, real food, whole food. The I for intimacy, not in a sexual way, although that's one aspect, but more inside of a relationship in terms of combating loneliness. The S for sleep, the H for humor. These are the things that comprise the idea of getting selfish. And so we're going to dig into how each of these can actually impact your occurrence and actually the treatment for breast cancer potentially there. So we look at spirituality, and I'll kind of start these off, and Eric, definitely jump in here. Ian Goller said, meditation or prayer is the single most powerful tool to aid recovery from disease and lead to a life of maximum health. So here's one aspect, one study that was done, and this analysis of basically is what's called a meta-analysis, means that researchers will kind of review multiple studies, and they'll compile the information to make some sort of predictive analysis. And so they looked at 43 studies on people with advanced cancer. And it said that people who report spiritual well-being, right, the fulfillment, that they were connected, were able to cope better with their illness and find meaning in their experience. But here's the key. It says, in research done specifically on women with breast cancer, spirituality and prayer has been associated with less depression. And we talked about depression as a form of stress. We talk about that stress cascade that happens in a more positive sense of well-being. Well, we just spoke about negative emotions and how the negative emotions were predictive of about roughly 59% increased risk. So being spiritual, having this spirituality and prayer, it increases and helps to buffer those things that seep into our mind and can lead to disease formation.
And this is, as part of many spiritual frameworks around the world, but obviously coming from a Christian framework,
Yes.
this is part of what actually, when we're to grow, develop character, and these trials come, and so sometimes it helps you to make sense of the trial in a broader, more eternal kind of light, and so it gives a meaning to it that others would never be able to find. And I think part of it also is being able to leave your problems, in our case, we would say at the foot of the cross, but being able to bring our problems and leave them somewhere, so that we know that we have a higher power that is also working on our behalf. And I think that's one of the reasons why this works so well, being spiritual and prayer, where you actually have someone to talk to at all times, to plead with and to cry to, in the moments that are most dark when you're going through these situations.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it ties into the equation, right? So stress equals demands minus resources, and identifying that there are resources, higher source resources from God and from spirituality that can help you offset those stressors of life, the demands of life.
And I would say, just one quick other thing is that, the world, as we say this all the time when we do our talks, the world wants to give you false resources.
Yes.
They want alcohol and drugs and stuff like that to be how you cope with life. But the true resources, the great resources of spirituality, prayer, and some of the other things we're about to talk about, those actually can offset the stress and by default then reduce disease burden and help you manage disease better if you've had disease, as this slide actually points out very nicely.
Yeah, and this is a great study that was done reported in the Journal of American Medical Association. In this study, researchers compared women who attended religious services more than once per week with those who never attended. And what they found is that attending church, actually, they found it reduced the risk of dying from cardiovascular disease by 27%. But here's the catch. And cancer, specifically breast and colon, by 21%. Now, the researchers further analyzed that and estimated that 23% of the effect, was social support, 11% by changes in depression symptoms, 22% by stopping smoking, and 9% by optimism. But it left 35% unexplained, meaning that going to church, they couldn't figure out what was that secret sauce. What exactly was it in this environment of being spiritual and going to church that really led to individuals having the reduction in burden of disease?
Yeah, the scripture says faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen. And so there's a component to this that I don't know that is ever going to be perfectly explained by science, but there's a connection to God that is made that is beneficial.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we could hover on spirituality for a lot longer, but we move on to the second letter in E in exercise, right? Second letter of selfish. The E stands for exercise. And Nelson Mandela said, exercise is the key not only to physical health, but to peace of mind. And so this is one of the things that we understand and identify. And so a large study has been done on nurses, physicians, and called Physicians' Health Study, Nurses' Health Study. And this specific, the Nurses' Health Study, collected information over 29 years. And what they found, they reported that moderate or vigorous physical activity for 7 or more hours per week, not per day, but per week, right? Compared to those who reported less than 1 hour per week, resulted in a 20% reduction in developing breast cancer. That means going for a brisk walk. That means dancing around. That means kind of playing. That means doing simple activities can reduce your risk of developing breast cancer. And the association was similar in both premenopausal and postmenopausal women. And here's one of the keys, right? So when you look at this, you're like, okay, I guess how does moving around really help me? How does vacuuming, how does carrying the laundry upstairs, how does parking further away really begin to help me? Well, what physical activity, moderate to vigorous, does is what studies have been shown. It improves your immune function, right? It improves the antioxidant capacity inside the body, which is really fighting that oxidative stress or that rusting of the vessels, and it decreases the inflammation. It has anti-inflammatory properties. It has all these different types of benefits. It decreases inflammation, like I mentioned, decreases oxidative stress, decreases the fat burden, decreases insulin levels. That's key. Decreases leptin and decreases the sex hormones that may increase and potentiate some of these events.
Let me jump into exercise real quick. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I think we've been duped into being told to exercise to lose weight. And when people don't see the exercise makes them lose weight, they get frustrated and they walk away and don't realize. I say it all the time. Actually, I'm taking it from someone else, and I'm going to paraphrase it. But I say it all the time, and that is that when you in America, food, and specifically processed foods, is the most overused anti-anxiety medication. Exercise is the most underused. And so we know that everything from the release of endorphins you get when you exercise, that makes you, I was just talking to a patient, he was like, when I exercise, it's as if all my problems just disappear. Like they just drift away. And when I come back from the exercise, it's as if they're back in perspective and my stress levels stay down after I've gotten a good exercise. And it obviously increases circulation. So make sure you get blood everywhere and move and circulates blood through your body. Stagnant blood in the lower extremities, pooled in the veins, comes up and gets to your kidney so you can flush things out, like toxins and other things. But one of the things that we talked about, to reduce the level of insulin and leptin, but that means that by default, one of the things that happens when we exercise, we lower our blood sugar levels. Mm-hmm. And high blood sugar, is one of the things that actually disrupts our white blood cells' ability to fight infection. But it also then disrupts our body's ability, when we have chronically high blood sugars, disrupts our body's ability, the immune system's ability to actually recognize and fight cancers in the earliest microscopic phases of it. So exercise actually helps in that way. And I always plug sweating. Some people say they don't like to sweat. Sweat is very good for us. It's a way to get sodium out of your body, toxins out of your body, without passing them through your kidney. The skin is like the largest organ from a surface area standpoint. So it's a great way to actually detoxify without having to go on a long juice fast or something. So exercising, sweating every day is beneficial for all those reasons, and definitely for all the reasons we listed here.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. I'm hearing that we need to go ahead and do a specific exercise talk.
Absolutely.
I think that's in the works. We're gonna have to kind of drop that one soon. All right. So some of the other aspect is love. Now, unknown author kind of said, love yourself enough to live a healthy lifestyle. But here's the thing. When I speak of love, oftentimes we think of love as a noun, but love is a verb. Love is an action. So we speak about forgiveness. We speak about gratitude. We speak about volunteering. These are all the fruits of love. These are all the manifestations of love. We talk about 5 love languages. These are based on action. But when we love, we also know that it's the antithesis of stress, right? So when we're stressed, we release what's called the stress cascade, right? The fight or flight. But when we engage in love, right now it's to tend and befriend, that we release oxytocin. And it's most often described with women with their children. But we also know that it's amongst family members. We also know oxytocin is released with pets too as well, and emotional support dogs, animals. So one of the most interesting studies that I stumbled on was that the authors in this research concluded that they describe a receptor-mediated inhibitory, which means it prevents something, effect of oxytocin, OT, and oxytocin analogs on the proliferation or growth of human breast carcinoma cancer cells, right? This is insane. So just simply by loving, there's some in exhibiting this hormone called oxytocin, there's potential that it can impact in a positive fashion to decrease the expansion, the growth of human breast carcinoma cells. This is paralleled by a change in immunophenotype. In addition, they observed that oxytocin inhibits specifically estrogen-induced proliferation and has a synergistic effect with tamoxifen, which is oftentimes used inside of breast cancer.
Wow.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. So food, we love talking about food. This is one of our platforms is talking about nutritional stress and nutritional resiliency. And this is another quote by Ann Wigmore. The food you eat can either be the safest and most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And so this is a summary slide that we'll dig into in just a few moments here. But we understand that when we look at fats, and specifically high saturated fats, with saturated fats for the vast majority come from animal products. There's a few tropical plant-based saturated fats, but majority are all these. And so high saturated fats, they increase the receptor positive cancers, particularly estrogen positive risk of breast cancer is what these studies have shown. For red meat, processed meats and processed and red meats, which include beef and pork and lamb, that these things, that it's the carcinogen compounds are really found in what's called heterocyclic amines, HCAs, that begin to happen when you're grilling, when you're frying at increased temperatures that are there. And these things mediate the onset of breast cancer. So this is significant that's there. We look at red wine. And this is close and personal to me as a cardiologist because I have patients nearly, I almost say every day, hey, doc, a glass of red wine is good for me, isn't it? Isn't it going to protect my heart? And what studies have revealed is that ethanol consumption that has a carcinogenic effect on breast tissue, and it can mediate the breast cancer development too as well. Now, on the positive aspect, one of the things that we'll see and we'll touch on is that beans, and soybeans in particular, are beneficial for reducing breast cancer. Fruits and vegetables, fiber, carbohydrates that are rich, fiber-rich vegetables make you chew. That also mitigates the risk of breast cancer, and fruits and vegetables the same. So from a positive aspect. But Eric, I know you had some other comments about some things that are not on here.
I did want a couple quick things. One, I think the alcohol comment is really important. Again, it is touted by many as a resource to manage their stress. And in fact, it can actually become a demand on their body in that it can be carcinogenic. We know alcohol is a carcinogen. There's no real question about that. And so that's one of the things that's important to highlight. The other one to highlight here is soybeans. A lot of people say, no, there's estrogen in soybeans, so I can't eat soybeans. But in fact, they're phytoestrogens, and they're actually protective against breast cancer. And there's still a whole lot of misunderstanding around that, but the studies are overwhelming that soy, especially non-GMO, minimally processed soy products like edamame and tofu, actually are very protective in that regard. And so I would mention a couple other things. One of the things if you look at the research, read a book like the China study, one of the things that's highlighted is the dangers of the Western diet. And one aspect of it, besides processed foods, which we'll talk about in a second, is dairy products. And why? Because there are good studies, and I think Dr. Michael Greger actually highlighted this in some of his nutritionfacts.org presentations, but bovine leukemia virus from milk, and they've even found that the DNA of that virus is embedded in some of the cancer DNA, just to show you how connected the two things are. And that comes from cow's milk, and animal products and so forth. Obviously, in order to get cow's milk, it's pregnant cows that produce the milk. And so there's a lot of estrogen. And we all know that what you're trying to get away from is high estrogen levels, which is one of the reasons why breast cancer is on the rise. We should have probably put up a slide that shows this, but the age of menarche, the age at which girls begin to have their periods, has gone from 16, 17, 18, if you go back a couple hundred years ago, and depending on the country, and it's dropped to the average girl in America now starts having her periods at 12. The average African-American girl starts having her period at 9 years of age. And we could unpack that, like to your point, Dr. Batiste, we could do that at a whole nother talk, like exercise. But the reason that's important is because that means the breast tissue is not only developing earlier, it's being exposed to estrogen for years more. The lack of breastfeeding, and I cannot emphasize this enough. We don't breastfeed enough, especially Black women in many of our parts of the country. But breastfeeding lowers that estrogen burden on a woman for extended periods of time, also reducing breast cancer risk. So all of those things matter. Breastfeeding, changing, and that early menarche, just to jump back to that, has a lot to do with in elevated leptin levels, which has to do with earlier and larger fat deposits from the Western diet. So we can do a whole other talk on that, but I want to emphasize that all of this stuff kind of ties together, which leads us to back to milk, which is also the protein casein in cow's milk, is viewed by many experts as a cancer promoter. And is probably part of the reason we have so much breast cancer and more of it happening, because we've pushed, milk, it does a body good. And so growing up, I thought if I didn't drink lots of milk every week, I wouldn't grow to be big and strong. And actually it was, growing us big in the wrong way, number one. Number two, I had to give up milk because of what it did to me in terms of just dealing with seasonal allergies and mucus production, but it's doing this kind of damage all over through that protein casein, which actually promotes the cancers if they begin in the body. And the last thing I really want to say is sugar. We talked about sugar a little bit before, but the amount of sugar we consume in America.
No, don't give away our next talk, right? Because sugar, we're going to drop sugar next.
But I want to just mention that, man, if you are at all at risk for cancer, one of the things you have to get out of your diet is these processed sugars. Now, the whole fiber, we mentioned fiber and fruits, perfectly fine. The apples, the grapes, the dark berries, perfectly fine. Eating good fruits and vegetables is really important. But when you strip the sugar of all of that nutrient, strip the sugar from all that fiber, and add it to processed dry foods, it damages the immune system, makes us insulin resistant. All of that helps to promote and develop the diseases that we all want to prevent. So getting the processed sugars out of our diet is critical.
Absolutely. And, people always want to ask, and I can't help it. They'll always ask, like, well, isn't such and such type of sugar good? Isn't this sweetener good? And I always use the analogy when I give talks is the fact that, we're all humans, but we're all different. So if you have aliens coming down and they're saying, we want to get all the humans, they're going to snatch up all the humans. So your body is going to detect sugar as sugar, right? Yeah. So it doesn't matter if it ends in ose, dextrose, maltose, fructose, it's sugar. And if it's inside of an unnatural state, which means it's not found in nature, that's exactly what Dr. Walsh is talking about. He's talking about this is one of the precursors of it. So we've talked a lot. We talked about animal products and so forth. But here's the thing for those of you out there who may be plant-based, who may be vegetarian, and you're saying, well, hey, I'm already doing this, doc. I'm good. There's no worry. Well, you're right if you're eating foods from the earth. If the foods you're eating are untouched by man, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds, you are on point. Studies have shown it can reduce the risk in postmenopausal women by nearly 14%. But if you're of the other persuasion, if you're increasing a lot of the unhealthy plant-based foods, you're having like cookies and pizza and you're having French fries and burgers, and you're saying, hey, I'm plant-based, there's no meat in here, right? I'm having foods that it's carbohydrates, but it melts in my mouth, not in my hands. They're ultra processed. Studies have shown it increases your risk of breast cancer when comparing the two.
And this goes back to the last slide where we just talked about sugar and fat. And that is because if you are if it's plant-based, but it's processed, ultimately you are releasing massive amounts of processed oils, which are with very little nutritional value, add calories, and when you add fat to the body, it can add estrogen to the body by default. But the sugar is why that second tier actually makes a lot of sense. A lot of these foods are made to be palatable just like any other food, even though they might say they're vegan, but they're made to be palatable oftentimes by adding a lot of sugar.
Absolutely. All right, kind of hitting in there. Now, this is a research that was done by Dr. Bernard roughly around 2006. And so this study is an excellent study that looked at the combination of eating fiber-rich foods, or in other words, a plant-based diet, along with exercise. We've already spoken about nearly both. And what they did is they compared a group that undertook this versus those who remained in usual care, which means they were relatively sedentary. They ate the standard American diet, or some variation of it, less plant-based approach. And what they did was they said, what's the likelihood that the cells will grow inside of the serum from these individuals? And what they found is that in individuals, when they shifted them from eating the usual care, the regular foods, over to a fiber-rich food along with exercise, they were able to show a decrease, those hash mark bars, inside of the growth of breast cancer cells when they put them inside the serum. But it didn't just stop there. They also found that if you put these cells inside the serum, what's the likelihood that the serum or the blood from people would kill the breast cancer cells, right? That they would attack, your body system would actually attack. And this is what's called apoptosis, right? To kill those cancerous cells. And what they found is that there was an increase in the killing, right? So your cells all of a sudden became John Wick. They started becoming people who were assassins and taking out all of these cancerous cells and identifying them and taking them out by simply the foods you're eating and the movement in what you do. And that's powerful. That's power. That's so, I mean, we talk about encouraging that my actions can actually predict what's going to occur, right?
And reduce risk and reverse disease.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Powerful. And so looking at more, and I love it. And I'll tell you, homage to Joel Furman. If any of you guys follow our show here, we had Joel Furman on, and he's one of great authors, done a lot of work inside the field. And I love his terminology, G bombs, right? G bombs. You got to get your G bombs in, your greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And so almost taking that same sort of format that's here, studies have shown significantly that if you're having those dark green leafy vegetables called cruciferous vegetables, your kale and broccoli and cauliflower, they have the flowery like appearance and the ruffled leaves, that these things are significantly associated with reduction in breast cancer up to 15%. And this is in a meta-analysis, which means that a composite of multiple studies. But not just that, it tells us that when you begin to increase these things, that you can get your protein, that yes, it helps protect the blood vessels. Yes, it helps give you all the nutrients that you need, the omegas and so forth. It's so powerful. Beans, Eric already talked about really the power of soybeans, right? And so wonderful aspect that's here when we look at researchers in this report out of Journal of American Medical Association, they look specifically at soybeans. And they found that after that, evaluate the association of soy food after intake after diagnosis of breast cancer with total mortality and cancer reoccurrence. The results revealed 29% reduction, 29% in death, and 32% reduction in reoccurrence from individuals who ate soy foods, right? So we're talking about soy-based tofu, foods that's closer to their natural state. Now, I'm not saying about soy isolates, which are heavily processed and isolated down, that there's some studies that have shown that they increase some of the adverse effects inside the body, but your whole foods are extremely powerful. Kind of going through mushrooms, and I have to admit, I always kind of tell folks this, I'm not a lover of mushrooms, but I put them in things because I know what they have so much power that's there. And so, and this study that was done in nutrition cancer, it said, and it say women who ate at least 10 grams of fresh mushrooms a day, it's about 1 button of mushroom per day, had 64% reduction in the risk of breast cancer. And these studies are primarily done in Asian countries where consumption is a lot higher, but showing a substantial improvement.
Well, and let me jump in on mushrooms. There's a lot of debate. Some people really don't believe they should eat mushrooms. I've heard people tell me it's a fungus, it's not a plant. Let me just be plain. There's no edict anywhere, biblically otherwise, that you shouldn't eat mushrooms. But the science really does say for those mushrooms that are safe to consume, the benefits you see from this study are reproducible. And part of that is because mushrooms have compounds in them that stop angiogenesis. So they stop the process with which blood vessels would be sent into the cancer cells so that this cancer can grow and metastasize. Mushrooms stop that from happening. And so it makes it harder for cancer to grow, which is one of the reasons why mushrooms are just so good for you, because all of us are going to have cells that mutate as human beings. But this is one of those protective ways that you can protect against it. But it also, as a caveat, mushrooms also stop angiogenesis into fat cells, making it harder for you to actually lay down new fat cells. And a lot of times when I tell people that, they're more interested in whether or not they should eat mushrooms. But we make some amazing shiitake, portobello mushroom burger sandwiches and stuff. I mean, they're really healthy, really good, great meat substitute. And so I encourage people to experiment with, mushrooms and trying to find some good recipes with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We could list all of the positive benefits that are here. I love that you touched on those because that's important to understand more of the why we're seeing some of the reduction in the risk of breast cancer too as well. One of my favorites is berries. I believe berries are like the powerhouse fruit, right? That's what you need to have every single meal for the heart, but also we see this for the for breast cancer. In the study of nearly 75,929 women linked higher intake of berries, and specifically blueberries, up to 31% lower risk of estrogen receptor negative breast cancer, simply by having your berries. Smoothies, your smoothies. I don't mean berry pie now, but you can.
And then you can make berry pie, but don't process berries.
Exactly.
Sugar to it. You might be able to figure out a way to make a healthy pie, but you're right. You want to unprocessed.
Yes. So these things with the colors, the more colors of the rainbow that you ingest, the more beneficial effects you're going to have. The antioxidant effect, which is powerful, that's there. Seeds are important. Seeds, specifically flax seeds is what we look at. And so a lot of observation, which means they just kind of track people over time and said, let's see what happens to those and those who have more versus those who have less. And they found that those who had more ingestion of flax seeds had a decreased risk of primary breast cancer by 28% and 31% lower mortality or death among breast cancer patients. So another powerhouse, given the omegas, given all the components that can really change the narrative.
Seeds are very important on so many levels.
Yeah. So we'll get kind of moving on. The I in selfish is intimacy. We could talk about food continually for a lot longer, but true friendship is sound health. It's the value of it is seldom known until it's lost. Charles Caleb Colton. And so when we talk about intimacy, yes, our minds immediately go to intimacy between a husband and a wife or between a relationship, but it's also intimacy just in our core relationships, our friendships. It can be that bond, that connectivity. And you may ask, well, what's different between the love and that? Well, we talk about intimacy, once again, being the antithesis of isolation, right? So when we talk about isolation and this idea of loneliness, these are aspects that intimacy really is the antithesis of that we look at. And so when we look at women who are diagnosed with breast cancer, who had the most social ties, the intimate ties, friendships, individuals that they can communicate with, shared experiences, were less likely to have a recurrence and less likely to die from breast cancer than women who were socially isolated. Now, there's other studies that have shown that when you put people inside of a group, and they've done experiments, and they are able to commiserate with individuals going through very like and similar experiences, that's where they get the greatest benefit. So that's why you get breast cancer support groups, cardiac support groups become important, because now you're able to absorb and learn and feel as if you can overcome in the power that exists.
That's right.
Powerful aspect that's there. The S for sleep, right? Sleep is important, something that we all struggle with at various times, and it's the golden chain that ties health and our bodies together. Thomas Dekker, we have to look at our sleep, and so we understand that lack of sleep can induce a stress cascade. We know that it increases the level of the stress hormones that are inside your system, which can alter really the metabolism. It changes your ghrelin and leptin, which is the hunger hormone and so forth. And that review of the Nurses' Health Study revealed that too much sleep, it's a U-shaped phenomenon. So too much is not a great thing. It's almost like Goldilocks. Not too much, not too little, just enough between that 7 to 9 hours. That post-diagnoses and regular sleep difficulties were associated with strong elevated risk, 35% of all-cause mortality or death, and a moderately greater risk of breast cancer and non-breast cancer mortality. So our sleep is important. It's important.
And let me jump in on sleep. This is going to be one of my next kind of church talks is going to be on sleep. So we're going to have to do one of these on sleep as well, like sugar. But Sleep is important because what the studies have found in people who suffer from trauma, emotional traumas, is that it is when you sleep that you are able to dissociate emotionally from that trauma. That happens when we sleep. There's a great book, Why We Sleep, I think is the name of the one I just read. Again, I'm probably going to read it 3 or 4 more times. But it really speaks to the fact that it's when we sleep that we heal from emotional trauma. So I want you to go back, remember back into earlier in this presentation, we talked about the impact that trauma in life has on breast cancer risk and by default, illness in general. Sleep is the way God gave us to be able to help heal from that. And it's not just sleep in isolation. Obviously, therapy is important and all the other things we're talking about. But if you never sleep, you never give your body the chance to emotionally, not your body, your mind, the chance to emotionally heal. And when I read and understood that, it really made me understand why so many of us hurt for so long in this country, because so few of us do the things we need to do to get good sleep, meaning have a cool down in our bodies to help us to sleep, use our beds just for sleep and for sex and nothing else. Getting away from blue lights of the screens on our cell phones and laptops for 2 hours before bedtime, not eating anything 3 hours before we go to sleep, and giving our bodies at least 8.5 hours of sleep time availability. Sleep is one of the most healing things that you could possibly do.
Absolutely. One other aspect I'll just throw in there too as well is that we understand that our parasympathetic system is activated at certain levels of sleep.
Yep.
So what that means is that if you're able to if you're able to have sustained sleep, good sleep, enriching sleep, right? Not broken sleep, and you enter into the stage of sleep where your parasympathetic tone is activated, and then now your blood pressure dilates. Now you reduce that tone of sympathetic hormones we outlined already that can be so damaging to your health. So there's power. So much is loaded inside this concept of sleep, the S of selfish, the second S.
It's the reverse of the stress response.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all these things are tied together and they all really help feed upon each other. So we say humor or laughter, the joy of life. That trouble knocked at the door, but hearing laughter hurried away is what Benjamin Franklin said. And so we understand we have to have some laughter in life. And so one say looked at laughter yoga, and which we understand in terms of stretching. So not from a religious practice, but from more stretching and relaxation, that it decreases the stress in cancer sufferers before chemotherapy, that laughter alone can alleviate stress by lowering levels of stress hormones in your blood. I say all the time, when I'm on call and I'm dealing with very sick patients, it can be stressful. Yeah. I'm reading my studies. I will sometimes put on a comedian in the background when I'm reading studies. I'll put on a TV show that makes me laugh, and I'll just laugh out loud. Literally, the old school laugh out loud, not this LOL business. And and so other studies have shown that laughter can also strengthen your immune system by increasing infection-fighting antibodies. There's power inside of laughter, and we know that all these aspects are tied towards the propensity towards developing malignancy and cancers. The joy of life is important.
And let me say that for a lot of us, we think that, we have to be serious all the time. Yeah. We have to be about it, getting stuff done. Pause and take time to laugh. Surround yourself with people who not only make you laugh, but are cool to laugh with you. The good news is if you have those kind of people in your life and you never I have no idea what laughter yoga is. But I grew up in a house where we laughed constantly. And even now, if I need to laugh, I can call my brother and he will say something that'll make me laugh almost by default. So having those people in your life that you can bond with so that you check off a few of these things in selfish and laugh at the same time with those relationships. And let me say this, you should be able to laugh with your church people as well. Some folk go to church and they're more miserable at church than they are anywhere else. Obviously, during the sacred services, I'm not talking, but we should have the kind of relationships, even in our spiritual interactions, where we are able to laugh. The Bible says that laughter doeth a soul good like medicine. That's what the Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, says.
Absolutely. And I'll throw to that too as well in a practical fashion is on our jobs. Yes. We work 8 hours, sometimes 10 hours. You think of it. That's a third of your day to a half of your day that you're spending with people outside of your family. So by default, your work environment, and colleagues become your family. So if you
Absolutely.
can't learn to laugh, if you can't learn to offset the stress of work with having relationships that are there, if
Yep.
you can't get the humor, the food, right? All these, the exercise, these are all things you can do in that environment that can help bolster your health and move you towards an improved state.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So these are some of the aspects when you look at what can you do. The purpose of this was not to go through the standard medical approach towards breast
Right.
cancer. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to identify that yes, stress can impact you. The point of this was to identify that yes, we understand there's an increased burden in certain segments of the population, those of African descent, that those people, of women obviously, and so forth, those who are stressed. The purpose of this is to identify the fact that yes, there are tools that you can take under your belt and every single day try and adopt it. And so moving towards an improved state of health, and let's go ahead and try and end this thing called breast cancer, reduce the burden and affect those around you. Those
Absolutely.
around you. All right. All
All
right.
right.
It's a powerful talk. This is a good talk, as important talk, a needed talk that we had here today. And so we appreciate your time and for you all joining us here today
Yes.
as we've gone into this. And Eric, any last words?
Just we're going into the holiday season. Sometimes the most difficult time of the year to be healthy. So keep all of this in mind. Remember to put yourself first in terms of making sure you take care of yourself. God first in terms of having Him take care of you, and enjoy the rest of this year. We have some great shows coming up, and we look forward to interacting with everybody as we continue through the rest of the year.
All right. Yes. Take care, everyone. We will see you all soon.